You know, considering how much adoration he has in his home series, I don't think there exists another character in Smash Bros. With as lukewarm of a reception as Lucario. There are certainly characters that are much worse off, like Sonic for instance, but at the very least, people are passionate about how he's represented. I know I sure am. For those that don't know, Pokémon is one of my favorite franchises, and Lucario has always been a consistent favorite of mine. His really cool design, incredibly solid typing, and great move pool have always been super enticing to me, and I've used one several times throughout the years, to which I'm never disappointed. And I think the same could be said for many. And yet in Smash, I mean, when was the last time you felt anything about this guy? He's among the group of characters that people more often than not forget is even in the game. Why? Why is the poster child of one of the series' most acclaimed generations, someone who starred in his own movie and consistently ranks so highly in popularity polls, feel so flaccid in Smash Bros? Well, I think the answer is obvious. It's his moveset. When including a Pokemon, it's become standard for the development team to use them as, essentially, guinea pigs for new ideas and mechanics, whether it works on them or not. This is further compounded by the fact that the recent entries of Smash have been developed in tandem with whatever game they're pulling the Pokemon from, which usually means that the design is extrapolated from an incredibly surface-level understanding. I know that may sound cynical, and to be fair to the dev team, this doesn't fully apply to Lucario. Diamond and Pearl were out in Japan within the first year of Brawl's arduous development, but I still have that same feeling of not getting the full picture, as I do for other quote-unquote concept art characters. It all comes down to one thing: Lucario's aura mechanic, allowing him to deal more damage and knockback at higher percentages or when he's at a stock disadvantage, making him the ultimate comeback character. And I'm very conflicted on it. Aura is not a mechanic in Pokemon. It never has been and most likely never will, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Pichu doesn't literally hurt himself with his electricity, but that is a part of the Pokemon's lore, and feeds into the oh my god I'm being beaten by a literal baby mind game he puts his opponents into, which is admittedly very funny and much more interesting than what he would otherwise bring to the table. You could make the same argument in favor of Aura. After all, it's hinted at with his Pokedex entries and his anime appearances, where you can use it to attack, sense the presence of people, as well as communicate with his trainers telepathically. So it's not unreasonable to expect Aura to have a big effect on a Smash incarnation. See, that's not what really bugs me. What really bugs me is how that not only is his entire moveset centered around a made-up mechanic, but the rest of his moves are incredibly uninspired. Lucario is heavily based off of classic martial arts mythologies, his aura being an analog for the widely known concept of chi, an internal power all living things have that, when harnessed, allows the user's mind and body to be perfectly in sync as they battle. That's definitely something the developers considered, as you do see a lot of that poise, that finesse with his attack animations. He'll dramatically pose for his up smash, his jab and forward air have an impeccable sense of flow to them, and his victory animations sell this idea of this master martial artist completely in tune with his power and movements. Despite that, there's a lot about him that's counterintuitive to that idea. His jumps are somewhat floaty and feel like they lack control. His down air and up special completely halt his momentum, which feels incredibly jarring. And many of his animations come out way too fast to be able to showcase his composure. This isn't even mentioning how reliant he is on cheese to succeed. Following another martial arts tradition, Lucario is an honorable combatant, always willing to fight someone at their strongest. He's not against getting up close and personal, but he's not someone who should feel unfair to lose against, and yet he does. I don't really see how the current implementation of Aura could ever be fun for both sides. For the player, it's let yourself get hit for a while so that you can finally start playing at a reasonable strength, and for the opponent, it's awkwardly dance around his threat range at the risk of getting killed early because you dared to start winning the game. And it's such a shame too. These kind of moveset centralizing mechanics only serve to alienate players who don't want to deal with the gimmick, and to expect so many people who are fans of one of the most popular Pokemon to deal with something that is so incredibly polarizing is, quite frankly, bad design. But what if I could change that? What if I could properly represent his no-nonsense fighting style? What if I could make the concept of Aura more fun to play with and against? What if I could make him a lot more accessible, while still keeping that extra spice to push him over the edge? That is what I hope to achieve today. First, some ground rules. As previously stated, I will be keeping Aura as a mechanic. It's too entrenched in his identity in Smash to remove completely, and there definitely is potential in having a character who gets stronger the more he's damaged. However, I will be normalizing it, buffing its lows and nerfing its highs to make it less polarized in more game states. He will also reach the maximum Aura level much sooner, as right now it caps at 190%, which is just way too high. As a trade-off, Aura would only amplify specific moves instead of his entire kit. Some of his attacks are clearly designed as combo tools, but given Aura's increase in knockback, alongside the universal rage mechanic, it makes them ineffectual in that regard fairly quickly, so ironically this would be a buff. Given Aura's reduced roll, this finally gives me an excuse to tone down the particle effects on his hands, as I've always thought that they made his silhouette way too cluttered. At low Aura there will be no effect, at medium Aura his hands will glow slightly, and at high Aura they will be flared up like usual. Additional indicators of his Aura level would also be appreciated, like having his battle UI glow as he reaches higher levels, as well as the size of the flare up on his up taunt. I also think, since killing him early is less necessary now, that he should have a slight buff to his weight, as well as his falling speed. You'll see that fluidity of movement is a trend with the changes that I'll be making, so hopefully these new attributes would help make him feel less floaty and more controlled. With that being said, let's get into the moves. Does anybody else think it's weird that Lucario is Steel type and he doesn't have a single Steel type move in his kit? Does anybody else think it's weird that Lucario is a Steel type? Regardless, for my first change, I'd like to give him a Rapid Jab based on the move Bullet Punch. For it, Lucario will perform a rapid flurry of punches in front of him, with the finisher having him encase one of his fists in Aura to deliver a powerful uppercut. As you might expect, this move would scale with Aura, making it a solid killing jab later on. He could still keep his Gentleman, by the way, although I changed the final hit to launch out instead of up, as to not have too much overlap with his Rapid Jab. His dash attack, up tilt, and down tilt all stay the same, as they're all solid animation-wise and fulfill their functions fine enough. But I would change his forward tilt to be based on the move Force Palm. What? I hear you ask? Isn't that his side special? Not anymore, it isn't. This move would be similar to his current F tilt, having him thrust his palm forward. The difference is that it would have more ending lag, as I'd further exaggerate the pose he makes on his return to better sell his poise. In return, the reward for using this move would be much higher. When using forward tilt, an afterimage of a hand is sent out at a slight disjoint, with its size and power scaling with Aura. Think of its disjoint starting at his current F tilt's Aura Flare and ending at his unboosted side specials. Hitting the move at the sweet spot, the point where his palm is fully extended, would have some real heft behind it. It becomes one of his best kill moves at higher percents, at the obvious expense of it being laggy both to start up and wind down. This also means that I've taken away its command grab property, but it's never been particularly useful or faithful in that regard, so it's not like it really matters. On the topic of grabs, his grab, pummel, up throw, and down throw are all staying the same, as are his forward and back throws. The only difference is that I'd lengthen the animations of them because wow, they come out way too fast to see what is happening. Now, let's be real. It's understandable for it to not be in Brawl given that its prevalence in media started after that game's release, but the fact that Lucario has been in 3 Smash games and still doesn't make any use of his Bone Sword is a massive oversight. If I gave in to my bias, I'd have Bone Rush be a core part of his identity, as sword characters are my favorite archetype, but given that it's not always associated with him, I opted for a more subtle nod to that idea, assigning it to all of his Smash attacks, as right now none of them are really much of anything. At normal aura levels, the bone would look as it normally does, but at higher levels it will crackle with energy, kind of like Arid Bar, as well as gaining a slight damage and knockback buff. For his forward smash, Lucario would swing the bone out in front of him in an arc from high to low, kind of like Corrin's forward tilt, but with a much smoother animation. This is by far his strongest smash attack, but it would have quite a bit more recovery, again to allow for better posing as he returns the bone back to hammer space. His up smash would be similar to Sora's up tilt, with one big difference. He'll grab the bone and spin it overhead twice with a launcher hit to pull opponents into the flurry, but instead of doing a horizontal swipe, he'll abruptly stab the bone into the ground, causing a shockwave of aura to flare out at the top. The size of the explosion will depend on his aura level, allowing for a lot more vertical coverage, but with the expense of more recovery frames. As for his down smash, it's pretty much a combination of his current down smash and Greninja's, dual-wielding 2 small bones and stabbing them outward. It's his fastest smash attack by far, but it wouldn't kill until considerably more reasonable percents, even with his aura boost. Moving on to aerials, his forward air remains the same, as there's no reason to change it. It's a fun move to use. But his neutral and back airs will have their functionalities altered. His neutral air would now be a consistent multi-hit, kinda like Zelda's, but only hitting twice, and his back air would be given a pushback property like Corrin's. I've always thought that this animation looked cool, and it looks like it should be strong, so it having an effect on his physics would feel very intuitive, and as you might expect, it would scale with aura, with the size of the shockwave depending on your current percent, although both its range and power would be considerably less than it is now at high levels. And his last 2 aerials, up and down air, would have new animations. Starting with up air, I like the concept of a backflip kick, but the animation has always felt too stiff to me. I changed it to a backflip kick with both feet, with a similar flow to number 18's jumping down heavy in DBFC, and would similarly have a sweet spot on the top of his feet. And finally, his down air. I've always hated this move. For a character who should feel incredibly freeform with his movement, it's always felt incredibly clunky for it to kill all of your horizontal momentum. So instead, I changed it so that it only halts your vertical momentum, and has him kick with both feet one after the other with no aura effect. Kinda like if Pac-Man's downer had the pacing of DK's aerial hand slap. However, that's not all. At high aura levels, Lucario would send out shockwaves from his feet as he kicks, spiking anyone underneath him. And it would be a strong spike too, capable of killing pretty early if spaced correctly. Given that it's only accessible under certain circumstances, I don't mind giving him a tool like this, even if it can cheese some stocks. Now for the fun part, the special moves, the glue that holds the rest of the kit together. Starting off simple, his neutral special remains as Aura Sphere, as it should be, it's a signature move. Functionally, it would be identical to how it is now, but just like the rest of his aura attacks, the strength of this move would be normalized, buffing its lows and nerfing its highs, while still maintaining the increase in damage and size as your aura builds. His up special will also remain the same in terms of its source, but its functionality would be changed. I never liked how extreme speed stalls your momentum at the startup of it. It was most likely done this way to give the player more time to aim it, but it just feels a bit jarring for the move all about going fast to stop you in your tracks. Also, why is the hitbox only at the end of the attack? It makes it near impossible to use offensively when at high aura levels given how far you travel. I think this move is in need of an overhaul. I'd like the transition into and out of this move to feel as smooth as Rosalina's launch star, and for the hitbox to be omnipresent. It'll only hit once, but it would be pretty strong, gradually getting weaker the later into the move you're hit. It would still be angleable, but the travel arc would force you into an upwards direction, meaning that you can't use it to travel down anymore, not that you ever would. As normal, this move would scale with aura, but it would be considerably less ridiculous at max level than it is now. Before I get into the next segment, I'd like to go on a small tangent. My biggest issue with how the aura mechanic is currently implemented is how it necessitates a damage nerf to Lucario at early percents. He's the only character in the game who cannot function at a regular level without having taken a sizable amount of damage first. That obviously means that he can't reliably build aura without just letting himself get beat up for a while. And considering he reaches his regular damage output at 65% means that he's already halfway to death's door by the time that he can make the most of it. However, if you were to remove the damage nerf entirely, then there wouldn't really be any downside to this mechanic. He would start out plenty strong, and just get progressively more broken the more the opponent is winning, so it does need to exist in some form. I do think that it should be drastically lowered though, having him reach his regular fighting strength at around 40, maybe even 30%. This would be balanced out by the fact that, again, his maximum aura level wouldn't be nearly as high as it is now, capping at around, say, 120 with a 1.3 multiplier, instead of at 190 with a 1.8 multiplier. I'm sure some changes would need to be made to these numbers for balancing sake, I'm just trying to give a rough idea. With all of that in mind, that still leaves the issue of Lucario only being able to control his aura level by getting hit, as there isn't anything he can do to accelerate or decelerate the process, or at least there wasn't until now. That is where his new side and down specials come into play. Lucario's new side special could be the move Final Gambit. In Pokemon, Final Gambit is a move that deals damage proportional to the amount of health the user had when using the move, fainting them in the process. I've taken a few liberties as to how to adapt this, but the general concept will remain the same. On use, Lucario will surround himself in a blue flame, charging at the foe with such speed that it damages himself in the process. Obviously, this move would be strong, definitely capable of killing early, but the damage that it deals to the opponent wouldn't be nearly as detrimental as the effect that it would have on Lucario. The opponent will always take a set amount of damage, it wouldn't scale with them at all, but the damage Lucario would take would be proportional to his aura level, dealing more damage to himself at lower percents, dealing at most around 20 to even 30% in recoil damage at 0. The catch is that, like Charizard's Flare Blitz, it would be very telegraphed and incredibly punishable if whiffed, and Lucario would still take self-damage even if he doesn't collide with anything, although that isn't necessarily a bad thing. His down special is a continuation of this idea, but in the opposite direction. It's Life Dew. In Pokemon, Life Dew is a move that heals the user and his allies by 25% of their maximum HP. In Smash Bros., this would function similarly to Wii Fit Trainer's Deep Breathing, with some key differences. On use, Lucario will take a meditative stance, encasing his silhouette in shadows as a water droplet appears above his head. After a short time, it will fall, and timing a button press to the instant the drop disperses in water will heal Lucario. As for how much, well, I'm not so sure. The balancing on this would be very finicky, as I want it to be substantial enough to make a noticeable difference in his aura level while not being substantial enough to make him unkillable. Plus, just like Deep Breathing, trying to use this move without giving it time to recharge will have the droplet take longer to form, so it can't be spammed. This move, along with his side special, gives Lucario a way to control the pace of the match independent of whether he's taken direct damage from the opponent or not. You can risk it all with a well-timed Final Gambit to get some momentum going into an early kill, or take a more slow and methodical approach in order to survive longer to squeeze out a stock at a more conventional percent. You can even switch between these two game states on a whim, allowing for a ton of player expression and dynamic gameplay. That's it for his moves, but before I get into the final smash, I'd like to talk about the extra stuff. Lucario continues the trend of Pokemon characters not having their shiny colors as alternate costumes, which I've always found to be stupid. I don't even think that his yellow shiny hue looks that good, but it really should be a costume, as should be the case for every Pokemon. I've already mentioned how I change his up taunt, but I'd also like to alter his down taunt. He'll make the same battle stance, but I'd have him hold his bone sword out with one arm behind him, as it's now a part of his kit. His side taunt and all of his victory screens would remain the same. And lastly, this may be a controversial idea, but to be honest, I don't really like the fact that Lucario talks. I get why he does, he did it in the movie, and it's contextualized by him speaking directly to your mind through his aura, which has been implied with his lore, but I've never seen it as so core to his identity the way that it is for Mewtwo. As far as I know, Lucario being able to speak full sentences was exclusive to that movie, barring a few examples that most likely slip my mind. The overwhelming majority of Lucario in the anime tend to speak with the same simplistic vocalizations that all Pokemon do. I may not be able to speak on the entirety of the show as I haven't seen all of it, but I know for a fact that Ash and Karina's Lucarios don't, and I'd argue that those are the two most notable bits of representation Lucario has had in the franchise as of late. Whatever the case, when I play Lucario in Smash, I always end up thinking, oh yeah, they made him talk in this game. That's kind of weird. Again though, I feel like I'm probably in the minority with this opinion, so I'm not asking them to remove it outright. But if I had a say in the matter, I'd stick with the generic grunts the anime has been using for the last few years. Speaking of the anime, my last change would be to Lucario's final smash. Right now, it's an innovative attack called Aura Storm. Functionally and conceptually, it's fine, and considering that Lucario has never had an ultimate attack akin to Psy Strike or Malicious Moonsault, they've had to make something up for him, but I do think that there could be a more direct reference. In the Journeys anime, Ash had a Lucario that was capable of Mega Evolving, and he eventually learned to harness his aura to perform a new attack that Ash called G-Max Aura Sphere. Considering that it's an amplified version of his signature move, and the fact that he uses it several times in the series, most notably against Raihan's Duraludon and Cynthia's Togekiss, I think it has enough going for it to be considered Lucario's ultimate technique. For its Smash incarnation, I'll be taking more from how it appears in the Raihan battle, with some liberties taken. On use, Lucario will Mega Evolve and begin to charge a massive Genki-Dama-esque Aura Sphere above his head as he rises into the sky. From this point, a targeting reticle will appear on the screen, and pressing the special button will have Lucario smash the ball downwards, causing it to slowly descend like a smaller version of the Moon Assist Trophy. Upon colliding with the ground, it will explode, dealing massive damage to anyone caught in the blast. Lucario will then return to his normal form as he lands stylishly on the ground, allowing the fight to continue as normal. And that's it. That is how I would reinterpret Lucario in Smash. One thing I didn't expect going into this project is just how little I would actually change about his moveset. For a while I considered his design a huge failure. I was immensely disappointed with his made-up gimmick, his lack of interesting moves, and how frustrating playing as and against him can be. In an early concept of this rework, I even considered removing Aura entirely. But the more that I thought about what he could bring to the game and what his current playstyle means to his players, the question quickly turned from should I remove Aura or not to how can I adapt Aura to make him more interesting to play for more people. I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I do believe that I was successful in doing so. It's generally a good thing to be proud of your ideas, and I certainly am with mine. But, like with anything, all of this is entirely subjective. While I would love to see these ideas come to fruition, I'm sure that many others love how he plays right now, and I'm sure others don't even think that he has any problems. I don't agree, but I can respect that. In all honesty, this entire project was just an excuse to be able to celebrate a series that I love, and to give it the appreciation it deserves. And now I will leave you with some parting words. Nidoking is the best Pokemon in the franchise, Generation 7 is underrated, the fact that Squirtle doesn't have sunglasses as an alt is just criminal, and for God's sake, please add Tinkaton to Smash 6.
Fucking hate Corviknight.
They're shit animals. I go out every morning and throw rocks at them, and I try really hard to hit them on the head with rocks.